I want to take us back. This is the year 2024, and I want to take us back to 1963. And in this year, a lot of things had been happening, especially in regard to civil rights. Now, unfortunately, in the month of June 12, 1963, one of the greatest civil rights heroes in the state of Mississippi had been cut down, Medgar Evers. And Medgar Evers had accomplished a great deal of things for Black people in the state of Mississippi. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that during the 1960s, a great deal of our heroes had been taken from us. Just a few short months later, one of the greatest presidents in this country, John F. Kennedy. President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in Dallas, Texas. And then a couple years later, in 1965, Malcolm X was killed on February 21st, 1965. Just a few short years later, in the year 1968, we would lose two more very prominent leaders. Perhaps the greatest civil rights hero of that era and pretty much of all time, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was taken from us on April 4th, 1968. And then a few short months later, we would lose Bobby Kennedy, also known as the Attorney General who served under his brother, Robert F. Kennedy. All of these men were ordinary people, but went on to do extraordinary things. But one particular assassination that has always stayed with me had to have been that of President John F. Kennedy. It's so much mystery that is surrounding his death. And I want to dig deeper into that today. In fact, I have a great guest that is going to be walking us through the legacy of this man. He is one of the best historians, if not the best, that I know. His name is Ryan Jones. How you doing today, Ryan?
Cara, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for doing this. And I really, when we think about John F. Kennedy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., these are two men you can pretty much say dominated the 60s in a sense. And, when I think about John F. Kennedy, I guess you can say the bulk of the conversation around civil rights really began with his presidency, in a sense. But before we dive deep into that, I want us to go back to his journey. Can we just learn a little bit about his journey? The takeoff of the Kennedy family, Camelot. They were known as Camelot and pretty much American royalty. What is the story? How did it begin for President John F. Kennedy and his journey to the White House?
Well, it begins, when John Fitzgerald Kennedy is born May 29th, 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts, to Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Rose Kennedy. He was one of the earliest to be born, and his father was a major political presence, served as a UN ambassador under the Roosevelt administration. And so he had a lot of power. This family has, through generations, has generated a lot of power in the political spectrum. Initially, it was later Jack Kennedy, his older brother, Joseph Jr., who was a World War II hero who was tragically killed in the Second World War. And it was Joe Kennedy Jr. who was situated to become what Jack would have been. Jack had this lifestyle. He himself was a war hero, PT-109. But, Jack was, he was strictly, he was a social guy. He was on that type of business. Extremely smart.
Social, handsome,
charismatic. The women flocked to him, very rightfully so, but his idea of life was not in politics. And when Joe died, and unexpectedly, Jack was the one to step up. It's Jack's turn. We'll see that happen on November 22nd, 1963, when he himself falls victim of an untimely and unspeakable tragedy. And then the family and the rest of the world, for that matter, says, now it's Bobby's turn. When Bobby is slain in the early morning of June the 5th, 1968 in L.A., after his untimely death, it's Ted Kennedy, who is now taking over. And, of course, we have him until he succumbs to death in 2008. And so this family is based off of this. There were three four boys that were born into that family, and the rest were women. And Joe Kennedy wanted to have one of his sons in the White House. That was his ultimate goal at the end of the day. And so after Joe's death, Jack gets involved in politics as early as 1946. He's in the House, and then he goes into the Senate. And, during the 1950s, where things are beginning to change, we're at the Cold War, we're right out of Korea. Eisenhower, who was the predecessor to Kennedy, is dealing with the racial tensions that are occurring specifically in the southeastern part of the United States. We reference the Supreme Court's decision in May 1954, the overturning of Plessy versus Ferguson, ordering the integration of the schools. And so this is the climate of hate and fear that is beginning to enter into the lexicon of American culture. In Mississippi alone, you spoke about my favorite hero in all of this, Medgar Wiley Evers. The state of Mississippi saw 3 black people killed, which began to serve as this galvanizing moment. The Reverend George Lee, Lamar Smith, and of course this 14-year-old precious little boy who's lynched in the Delta for breaking the Southern code of taboo between black and white. And so when you're beginning to see in the second term of Eisenhower the integration of Little Rock and all these other atrocities and the uprise of television, this is really when Jack Kennedy is realizing he's next. And so in this upcoming election in 1960, the sitting vice president, who would become a future president, 37th President Richard Milhouse Nixon, who's the vice president under Eisenhower for the past 8 years, is up against this 43-year-old. Jack Kennedy didn't look like your typical president up until this point. So the first 34, if you look at a map of all the presidents, they all look the same in a way, right?
Yeah.
Here comes Jack, who speaks well, eloquent, war hero.
Charming.
He's charming. He has this elegant wife in Jacqueline Bouvier. And so what pushes Kennedy above in this election is this is the first time we've got a live televised presidential debate. In this election that occurred this year, we saw how critical that was before our current president, Joe Biden, and former Mr. Donald J. Trump. And we see how the effects of presidential elections are important. And Kennedy wipes the floor with Nixon. And Nixon's unprepared for that. He was not trained for that. Jack was ready. And it still became a very narrow election on that election day. It came down to the black vote, which many African Americans in the Deep South were prohibited from doing so, even though the Constitution stated they had that right. And it came down to the state of Illinois, specifically the city of Chicago. Chicago was a mob-run state. The key mob boss there was a man by the name of Sam Giancana. And we know that he made some calls to get Jack Kennedy into office. And we also know that a political strategy was to reach out to, what you talked about, who's probably the most well-known. I don't think that we are at liberty to say who is the greatest civil rights leader because we all have our own biases. I personally am very biased to Ella Baker. I don't think that the civil rights movement continues without her leadership and guidance, and how she was able to brainstorm creating the student movement and what we knew as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And people like Bayard Rustin, the grassroots organizers like the Fannie Lou Hamers. So it's in a male-dominated world. MLK stepped up and rose to that occasion. He had the charisma that Roy Wilkins didn't have. He had the oratorship that a Whitney Young didn't have. John Lewis is still young. He's on the come up. He's a disciple of King. Medgar Evers, you can't talk about the civil rights movement without talking about the movement in Mississippi.
Exactly.
Because because when you think about MLK and measure his success and reach, many of his campaigns took place state to the east in Alabama, Montgomery, Selma, and Birmingham, of course. But until you go into the places like Greenwood and Natchez and Vicksburg and Jackson and all these other areas where, Tuskegee Institute concluded Mississippi was the most segregated state in all of America, that kind of changes things. And it's not so shocking that you mentioned all 5 of these chronological assassinations that Evers is killed first in the middle of this. And so when Jack wins the election, he wins because they realize that Dr. King is in Reidsville, Georgia. He's on the chain gang, right? And special advisor to the Kennedy campaign is a man by the name of Harris Wofford. And he makes a call to Coretta Scott King. And he lets him know that Senator Kennedy's worried about it, if there's anything they could do. She just wanted to see could she speak to him. They go further than that. They have him released. And Daddy King, who has this incredible amount of influence, tells his following, I've got a sackload of ballots, and we're delivering them to the doorstep of John F. Kennedy. Kennedy wins the election. There's this new look, new decade, television, and then you've got this era, which is reflected in what we know as Camelot. So there's a lot of great deal of sense of optimism.
So he brought a sense of change that had not been seen before. It was like a rebirth of a new day for America.
And democracy.
Right.
And if you listen to his inauguration speech, which was up there with, with Lincoln and Kennedy and Obama, it made you feel proud to be an American. No matter where you fell, if you were on the left, the right, the moderate, whether you're black or white, you had some sort of hope.
Because in a sense, doesn't it seem like their family, the Kennedy family, represented everything like the American dream supposedly stood for? Coming from the grassroots of working hard in whatever regard you want to say that they, of course, we know their father was involved in multiple different type of business situations, but basically, he rose from the bottom truly to the top. And they became like one of the richest families in the country. Is that not?
That's very true.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so his son is in the White House, and he is being a part of a movement that he probably, even though he knew that civil rights was an issue in this country, would you say that was a focal point for him when he was in the White House? Because I know you mentioned the Cold War, but what about civil rights? Because, I think that has been a debate for so long. A lot of people say, did he really care? Was it really on his mind to make an effort to make things better for black people in this country?
No. Civil rights was terrible politics. It's terrible politics now. Now they don't call it civil rights. They call it DEI. You know what I'm saying? And so it was not. In Eisenhower's farewell address in early 1960, late 1960, he talks about a military-industrial complex coming in. And so the new administration was focused on this potential threat 90 miles from the U.S. border in Cuba. In 1959, Cuban government is overthrown by a man by the name of Fidel Castro. And so this was what was the priority in the upcoming administration of Jack Kennedy. But if you listen to his inauguration speech, he talks about a hope for all mankind. So these civil rights leaders who are standing by Little Rock has happened. Black folks are still being killed almost weekly in the Deep South with no arrests and absolutely no convictions and almost no fanfare for that matter. So James Farmer, who was the founder of the Congress for Racial Equality in 1942, has been weighing on how can we see just how the new president is going to approach a Democratic president, because we've just come out of a whole decade with conservatism in the Eisenhower administration. And so there's this group, a interracial group known as the Freedom Rides, and they are trying to desegregate interstate bus travel in the South. The Kennedys are not really thinking about that. This is happening at the same time of the Bad Pigs invasion, which was an order by the CIA, led by a man by the name of Allen Dulles at the time. And when this Bad Pigs invasion backfires on Jack Kennedy and he's forced to take responsibility for it, even though it wasn't his call, the Freedom Riders are being attacked in Anniston and Birmingham, Alabama in May 1961 and later Montgomery. And the Kennedy administration was so worried about what could become of that in its next destination, which was the Magnolia State. The goal was to not actually enforce the law, but to prevent more bloodshed and violence. Because fortunately, there were no fatalities in the Freedom Ride campaign, which there really could have been. I mean, we're dealing with, A bus was firebombed in Anniston. You've got the United Klans of America, the second most dangerous Ku Klux Klan clavering in all of the history of the United States after the Mississippi White Knights Ku Klux Klan. So things could have happened. And then, of course, they're all sent to Parchman for 60 days, one of the most notorious correctional facilities in all of the United States soil. And so then the next year, your alma mater, a man by the name of James Meredith, tries to integrate University of Mississippi. Same scene that we see 5 years earlier in Little Rock. Meredith trying to enroll under the 14th Amendment, under Brown v. Board. There's met with major resistance. 2 people are killed on the campus. JFK enforces the federal law allowing Meredith to enroll. But then, after the lukewarm, if you should say, success in Albany, Georgia, they know that they've got to go to the Lion's Den. The Lion's Den was Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. Bull Connor's there. The UKA is there, United Klans of America. They just elected Governor George Wallace, who has shared his opinions on segregation in the United States. This is the climate that King and SCLC go into. And the goal was just to integrate downtown stores. But then Bull Connor, and the psychopath that he was, uses this excessive force on babies, 8-year-olds, 16-year-olds, who are just wanting to march on behalf of their parents. And we're exactly a century from Lincoln
freeing the slaves. Well, supposedly.
And this military document, the Emancipation Proclamation. And so, for them to ask, when I say them, white America asking black Americans to have a cooling off period. We've been cooling off for 250 years since we were brought to this country in slaves, in chains, in bondage, and sold against our will, forced to do manual labor for free, and still not given first-class citizenship rights. And so when these dogs and these water hoses plague every television screen on the entire planet, that was also in the Oval Office. And so what makes me feel that Kennedy is a hero, while he took his time in his first 2 years in his administration, this was still his first administration. Unlike Eisenhower, when Brown v. Board of Education occurs and Mamie Till sends Eisenhower a telegram urging for the investigation of the death of her son, he doesn't even respond because he doesn't have to, because he can't run again, And so Kennedy proposing this bill, one of the most important days in all of the civil rights movement, is Tuesday, June 11th, because that morning Governor Wallace is standing in the doorway of Foster Auditorium on the campus of the University of Alabama, preventing James Hood and Vivian Malone from integrating the school. On the same day, JFK goes on national TV and he proposes what I would call one of the greatest presidential speeches in all of mankind. This is up there with the Gettysburg Address. This is up there with Obama's acceptance speech in the Democratic National Convention. This is up there. And he talks about civil rights being a moral issue. And it proposes to Congress of a need for a civil rights bill to outlaw this system of what we know as Jim Crow. That doesn't happen under his pen because the president goes to Dallas, Texas in November 1963.
So now, one of the key things, I don't think that many people realize, because when we talked about just a minute ago, with Medgar Evers being assassinated, that same night when he was given that speech, this is when Medgar Evers was pretty much pulling up in his driveway, right?
Yeah.
And this is when, unfortunately, he was taken from us. He was cut down by a man named Byron De La Beckwith. And, this happens in the driveway of his home. And this leaves a widow and 3 children. So on that night, when a man who is considered the most powerful man in the world at this time is given a speech about the very things that Medgar Evers had been fighting so hard for his people in Mississippi, that is the same night that he was taken from the people of Mississippi. I find that's pretty interesting when you think about that. It's like a call to attention in that moment that it's surreal to see in that moment that Medgar Evers, who was perhaps the most prolific leader at that time in Mississippi, fighting for civil rights and justice and equality, he was taken from us. And then the man that was trying to move the mantle on it, this all happened in the same moment. I guess that does something to me when you just sit and think about that for a moment, because after this happens, and a few months later, as John F. Kennedy is beginning his, I guess you can say, his campaign trail to boost a lot of the attention on him running again, as election is getting ready to come and rear its head around. And I think that a lot of people don't get that, John F. Kennedy during this time, things are a bit shaky in the White House for him. Because, his own cabinet, you talked about the whole thing with the Bay of Pigs and how pretty much he took responsibility for everything, even though it wasn't really his fault. But a couple of people that was sitting, on his cabinet in office, he actually decides to remove them. Is that not right? He decides to fire a couple people after certain things took place in office.
Yeah, after the Bad Pigs, he fires Allen Dulles.
Allen Dulles, and this is who is Allen Dulles?
He's the director of the CIA.
Director of the CIA, and if I'm not mistaken, we're going to get into this a little bit later. He plays a role in the investigation of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, right? That's
right. He sat on the Warren Commission.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that a little bit later. But what I want to do now, so now we've made it to 1963, and in November of 1963, as preparations are in order, and he's getting ready to make his way to Dallas, Texas, walk us through what happens the moment that he gets off of the plane. He's landed, and it is hundreds of people out there. People are going crazy. They're screaming. They are shouting. They're happy to see her. They're happy to see Miss Jackie Kennedy rocking that pink Chanel suit, and she looked beautiful too, y'all. And as they are approaching the crowd, and they are happy to see the President of the United States and the First Lady, unfortunately didn't know what was about to happen just a few short moments later. So walk us through that morning leading up.
Yeah. Well, it's important to provide the context of why they were in Texas.
Yes.
In the first place. As you stated, they were on the campaign trail. The summer of 1963 was a pivotal one, turbulent. There was also some sadness. In the same time, just 2 weeks before Dr. King delivers his "I Have a Dream" speech at the Lincoln Memorial, the Kennedy family realizes they are pregnant again. This is hopefully their third child. Caroline was born in 1957, and John was born in November 1960. But she was pregnant again with a young boy named Patrick. And there's some complications in that pregnancy and the birth. And Patrick doesn't make it. He dies in a few hours. And this was a major turning point, not only in the Kennedy family, but, it really sets the stage for the closeness between the president and the first lady. Mrs. Kennedy is not seen publicly during this period, as rightfully so. In the state of Texas, in October, Dallas had a bad reputation. UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson went to Dallas specifically and was heckled and even attacked while giving a lecture in Dallas. And he warned the president, who was proposed to go to the state the next month, don't go to Dallas. You can go to Austin, you can go to San Antonio, you can go to Houston, not go to Dallas.
Don't go to Dallas.
And the reason for going there was Texas was, as it's been for a while, a red state. And here's the question that I think about is the vice president of the United States at this time was one of the most, a huge presence in the Democratic Party, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, who is Johnson doesn't have the pull that he has when he is termed as the vice president, because Bobby Kennedy is the second most powerful man as Attorney General. There was a rift in the Democratic Party in Texas. There was your liberal Democrat in Senator Ralph Yarborough, and then there was your conservative Democrat in John Connally, who was the governor, who would be sitting directly in front of the president in the motorcade. So when they depart the White House on Thursday, November the 21st, they fly and they go to Houston, and then they end up in Fort Worth that night, where they spend the night. The next day, they wake up at the Hotel Texas. And they are in Fort Worth, Texas. And, Kennedy talks about in this breakfast luncheon that morning, he says that I'm the man that is accompanying Jackie Kennedy around,
Right.
And you were so dead on point that the crowds were there because they wanted to see Jackie.
Yes.
She was so prolific and such a
Yeah, that lady didn't play. She dressed to impress. You never saw her slipping.
Yeah, she redefined what it meant to be a first lady in the United States. She really was.
And she did. Oh, and I just want to touch on that too. Like, y'all, she did a big restoration of the White House too. She said, like, when she got there, she was shocked to see the condition that the White House was in. So, y'all, she wasn't just sitting by looking pretty, wearing her pearls, and
that wasn't like popular
right
at the time.
Right.
Change was in I guess in the history of any America, it's not popular to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So this was huge, and so they take the short flight from Fort Worth on Air Force One, and they arrive at Dallas Love Field at 11:40 a.m. approximately, and they're greeted by this crowd at the airport. People are shaking hands. This is really, given what Adlai Stevenson said a month earlier, this was gutsy to do that.
Right.
They make it into the motorcade, license plate GG300, and they ride through the outskirts of the airport into downtown to make it to the Dallas Trade Mart. And they take many streets. They go through Cedar Springs Market, eventually gets onto Main Street. The president is not in a bubble top as it had been. That morning it had rained in Dallas, and Kennedy wanted people to be able to feel that they were close to him. Secret Service was right behind. Normally there should have been a Secret Service agent behind the motorcade. There wasn't on this time. So the president's motorcade is making it right from Main Street onto Houston Street. And the president says to Nellie Connolly, who was the wife of Governor John B. Connolly, and he says, "Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas doesn't love you." And the president responded and says, "Yes, it seems so." At that exact moment, the car makes an abrupt left turn onto Elm Street, and to its right and behind it crosses the Texas School Book Depository. And we see a volley of shots ring out. And then in this 5.6 second utterance, there's chaos. And something is terribly wrong happening in the motorcade. People are taking cover. They're covering their children. And there's just a sense of complete, total panic. The motorcade speeds to the nearby hospital, which happened to be Parkland Hospital. And the first reports began to appear right at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. They had been in the city of Dallas for 15 minutes approximately. The president is taken to Parkland with a very grave wound to the head, and he's operated on, and Jackie Kennedy's there, and the Secret Service is there. The vice president is whisked away in a room, in a somewhat of a closet room in the hospital. And people are now finding out that President Kennedy shots have been fired. We don't know what's happened to him. We don't know the severity of it. And then when a priest is called, that's when people kind of know what's going to happen. Yeah. And then, President Kennedy's pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. The president's press secretary, Malcolm Kilduff, announces that. So then the people don't know what's going on. Did Castro do this? Did Nikita Khrushchev of Russia do this? Was this the right wing who denounced everything JFK stood for? Nobody knew, and at the time when the president arrives, the late president now arrives back on Air Force One. Lyndon Johnson is signed, takes oath of office on the plane.
I know we're going to be really just diving into the assassination case and exactly the conspiracy surrounding that. But one thing that I think has stuck out to a lot of people is pretty eerie when you look at that photograph that was taken when LBJ was taking the oath of office, because standing right next to him is the former First Lady Jackie Kennedy, and she's standing there in her suit that she was wearing in the motorcade when her husband was assassinated. So the question really becomes, though, why why did this happen? You know, a lot of people have always wondered that. Why was Jackie Kennedy standing next to this man who's literally assuming the position that her husband was just in a few moments before he was taken?
I think it speaks to her strength.
Yeah.
I think it spoke to this in the myth, in the middle of this unspeakable tragedy. The transition of power was important, and a peaceful transition that we didn't know, the world did not know if this was, if you recall, what was the spark of World War I,
right,
was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. When he's killed, we go into a war for the very first time in 1917. So given what had happened the previous October and the United States being on the brink of nuclear war with what the Cuban Missile Crisis became, we didn't know if this was an attempt, a coup to overthrow the United States government. So it was important for LBJ to take the oath of office before they left this town. And Jackie Kennedy, all she did was show in her grief, in her despair, her most traumatic moment, to be present for that. And I think that was one of the most noble things that a dignitary or head of state could have done.
Like a sense of patriotic unity.
Absolutely.
So that,
absolutely.
I mean, it definitely does speak to her strength. Y'all, like I said, this isn't the next day. This isn't the next week. This is just moments after her husband, John F. Kennedy, had been assassinated. And she was standing there. You can see this photograph. It is everywhere on the internet. You can see this photograph where she's standing there next to LBJ as he takes the oath of office. And, you know, so one of the things I really remember was just how emotional one of the most famous journalists at this time got when he was announcing that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated, and that's Walter Cronkite.
Yeah.
And, you know, he shared a sentiment that hundreds, thousands, millions of Americans, and as well as many people around the world, were feeling in that moment. So walk us through now. So the assassination has taken place, y'all. President John F. Kennedy is no more.
Yeah.
And so now here we are. People are wondering what is happening.
Well,
they have questions.
Well, yeah, and the number one question is, who the hell would do this?
Exactly.
Who the hell could do this? Who could do this? Who could execute a commander-in-chief? This is the first presidential assassination since William McKinley in 1901. You know,
yeah, people look at the presidency, and this is why it's so crazy, because people look at the presidency as bigger than life. Because, you know, the president of the United States is considered like the most powerful person in the world, right? Mm-hmm. The most powerful person in the world. Now, this is what I have to know. When we think about the assassination of JFK, the question does become, was it a conspiracy?
Yeah. Well, you know, this investigation into this story takes place, you know, less than 90 seconds after, you know, Kennedy's not even at Parkland yet, and those that were there in Dealey Plaza were running to this picket fence where many eyewitnesses said that they saw gun smoke. Even some eyewitnesses said that they saw a puff of smoke and gun muzzle flash and all this other stuff. Some people feel like the shots were come from this 6th floor window in the Texas School Book Depository. The Dallas police were there. And this 24-year-old named Lee Harvey Oswald, who's an employee at the Texas School Book Depository, leaves and seeing all this commotion, so he says, and becomes the primary suspect in this case. Even before the Air Force One takes off from Dallas back to Washington, you know, people are wondering who could have done this, who had the means to do this, what are the facts. There was a great attempt to cover this up at the very beginning. So, you know, if you're asking me this question, was it a conspiracy? As a student of the story, it's impossible for it not to have been a conspiracy.
Yeah, because there were polls taken. So, you know, around that time, majority of Americans did actually believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
Right.
And then they took a more recent poll, and I think this is around the early 2000s, I think.
2013.
And they asked
50 years later.
Yeah, like, so that number drastically changed. Right. And majority of Americans believe no.
Yeah.
That there definitely was a conspiracy to JFK's assassination. So there are so many different stories out there that it's hard to even keep them straight. Yeah. You know, there are people that are saying that the CIA was involved. The FBI was involved. Lee Harvey Oswald did pull the trigger, but he definitely had help. There were, 3 other shooters, and one of the things that I do hear as well, some people even thought that the former vice president, LBJ, was involved in this. And they said, there wasn't a person they had seen at that time who wanted the White House more secretly, than LBJ. And so all of these different conspiracies, all these different investigations, that people have done on their own, a lot of people have done self-work to try to get to the bottom of the truth. But a very prominent person, who became a pretty big household name after a movie comes out in the early 1990s known as JFK, Attorney Jim Garrison of New Orleans.
Yeah, district attorney, yeah.
Yeah, so I I hear a lot of people have different opinions about him. There are some people that will say that he was crazy. There were some people that will say that his, whole investigation was a farce. And then there are some people that would say that, no, this man wasn't in fact crazy. They just try to discredit him because he was close to the truth. Yeah. Which one is it?
Well, again, it's based off of opinion. I thought that Jim Garrison is one of the heroes in all of the Kennedy assassination investigations, because he was, and still is to this day, the only person who had the courage and the guts to bring a trial into the murder of John F. Kennedy. And why? That's preposterous that he's the one, because the Dallas police, who was in charge in the custody of Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin, and he's gunned down not even 48 hours after the president's been killed on national TV by Jack Ruby in their custody.
48 hours, y'all.
47 hours.
Yeah.
Lee Harvey Oswald was shot at 11:21 a.m. JFK was shot at 12:30 p.m. 2 days earlier. So right at about 47 and a half hours goes by. Alleged assassin. And that's another thing. That's another thing. Here's your alleged assassin. Now there will never be a trial. And so that's where the act of conspiracy really enters into the mindset of everyone. Yeah. Like, no one had seen something that bizarre before.
Yes, it's like it starts peeling back so many layers, because even the man that killed him, right? Jack Ruby.
Yeah,
and then
character.
Yeah, so it just seems like the further you keep digging into this story, there is no doubt that there was a conspiracy.
Well, it depends who you're talking to.
Well, yes, but I think the part that really gets me is that when you said that Jim Garrison, the fact that this man from New Orleans, the district attorney, is the one to actually try to bring light to this case and to have an investigation about JFK. The question becomes, why isn't there more people like that? People in Texas actually trying to do everything they can in their power. It happened on their turf.
Well, they were. In the assassination and the aftermath, there are all these eyewitnesses that are mysteriously dying.
Yeah.
People who have some sort of direct connection to the case are getting karate chopped in the back or shooting themselves in the back of their head, and they're committed. They're deemed as suicides or ruled as suicides. So people were speaking out. There were many people who, and before Jim Garrison, the big Jolly Green Giant gets involved, this S.M. Hollins, the Penn Joneses, the Mary Farrells, the Mark Lanes, the Harold Weisbergs, these incredible, the Gary Shaws of the world, these incredible researchers were on the ground the night of the assassination when the Dallas police brought Oswald in shortly after midnight. And they're questioning him. So
they were trying to go ahead and really push forward with the investigation. See, we don't really hear about all of those, y'all. And the thing is, too, I think that, with Oliver Stone's movie, one of the things I think it did help do was make people think. it taught a lot of people not to just look at what is in black and white, and to go and do your own research, go and find out and seek answers for yourself. And I know that, the anniversary of JFK's assassination is coming up really shortly. Yeah. And, many people still pay their respects. I'm sure they go down there to that same location in Dallas, Texas, and they take a moment of silence and they think about this great man, who was once running this country. And even though it is 2024, many people still feel as though they don't know exactly what happened. So through all of your research and your work that you have done on this case, Ryan, tell us, who do you think were the people or a person that was involved in the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy?
Well, that's a great question. It's a very broad question. In my honest opinion, it was a collaboration of many different entities. I believe that the final straw was the president had every intention of withdrawing U.S. personnel out of Southeast Asia. National Security Memorandum 00263. The president was preparing to bring home combat troops by Christmas Day and completely removing all U.S. personnel in Vietnam by January 1, 1965. The president is killed 11 days later on Friday, November 22nd, 1963. The day after his funeral, Tuesday, November the 26th, President Johnson, his first order as president is he reverses that National Security Memorandum 00273, which is a reevaluation of the first one, which is basically in the sense we're going to keep those troops and we're going to escalate and send an additional troops over. So you got the Vietnam War. We know that Kennedy was evolving as a leader in the arena of civil rights. But, with Kennedy out of the White House, Johnson gets in. J. Edgar Hoover becomes safe, who we know is another narcissist psychopath that has
horrible person. I don't usually just say that comment, but he was absolutely horrible, y'all. This is the man that had literally bugs on Dr. King's house. I mean, he even had bugs on the Kennedys too, y'all. So he was horrible. He was horrible. I'm sorry. I just had to make sure I state that he was a horrible individual.
He was. That's an understatement. But when you look at the assassination, it seems that the president should never have gone into this, this motorcade slowing down to measly 10 miles an hour with no Secret Service on each side of the president.
Is it true that they said that he wanted to do this, like he wanted people to feel close to him?
He did, but that still doesn't mean that doesn't mean that the Secret Service shouldn't do their job.
Oh yeah, no, it's just like, because I want people to understand too, just like how much of a people's person, like a people's president that he was. He didn't, and that really speaks to his character too, y'all. Like I said, this was, would you say, like one of the most beloved presidents that had ever sat in the White House?
I think that his very short administration, those 1,000 days, and given the time period, given the different change of how a president should look and conduct himself, made it that way. But, when you become a martyr, you are in a completely different realm. When we lose our leaders, our beloved celebrities, when you lose a Kennedy, a Martin Luther King, a Robert Kennedy, even more in contemporary time, when you look at a death of like a Tupac Shakur, these were people who changed and impacted lives further way out of what they were known for. Tupac is his impact reached further than his music. It reached to Black culture, Black population. He told the stories that so many others lived every single day. When you see the president, you see his smile, you see his wife, you see his kids, you see him playing with his children in the Oval Office. You see him playing football with his relatives. It humanized him. Yeah. And so his assassination is tragic and violent as it was, that changes a lot.
And then even the man that he chose as his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, even that was a calculated decision, though, wasn't it? Like he personally he chose LBJ to be his vice president, didn't he?
Well, look at it like this,
because he had to have known. I mean, you look at the heavyweights that he had to deal with, like Richard Russell of Georgia, like these veterans. He had to have known. And LBJ, let's just say he had a few more irons in the fire than JFK did in that regard, because LBJ knew these Southerners. He knew these, well, Democrats, aka Dixiecrats, in a sense. So, I guess I really feel like with JFK, I feel like it was a calculated decision. With LBJ, it was a smart move in a sense.
Bobby Kennedy, who ran the campaign, did not want LBJ as vice president.
They didn't like each other, did it?
They hated each other.
They
despised everything.
But why though? Why did they hate each other?
Bobby wanted to do things their way, and Johnson was a very proud man, and he wanted to do things his way, and they clashed. So that's a very short and G-rated version of it, and that's another topic of a conversation. But JFK narrowly beat Johnson for the nomination. Yeah. Johnson thought he was going to win. He was the Nixon of the Democratic Party.
I had to bring him up, y'all, because I want to ask this question, and please tell us. Okay, so was he involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy? People really want to know this because we keep dancing around it. We want to know, was he involved?
Look, there's speculation that LBJ went to Dallas on the 21st. And he was supposedly at a dinner by a man named Clint Murchison. Clint Murchison was one of the wealthiest oil typhoon type people in the entire world. Same as a man by the name of H.L. Hunt and another man by the name of D.H. Byrd. These were Southern staunch segregationists. These men with extremely racist views, extremely wealthy, very powerful, had way more pull than any president could ever have. And it's alleged that Johnson went into that and told one of a mistress of his, a woman by the name of Madeline Duncan, that those goddamn Kennedys will never embarrass me again. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Did that happen? We don't know. I mean, some people said it did. Some people said it doesn't. What I think is very strange was that the president should never have gone to Texas. Johnson should have only gone. Johnson was the Texas big guy politically, and the president should never have had to have gone at that point. Maybe in the election season following the year 1964. So it makes you kind of wonder, the vice president who was the most powerless man on the planet is the president, his boss, is gunned down in his territory.
Right.
That's perplexing to me. It's perplexing to me that Johnson establishes this so-called Warren Commission of the folks that were against everything Kennedy stood for. These were not men who admired the president at all. Not Allen Dulles, not Richard Russell, not Arlen Specter, not future President Gerald Ford. All of these people.
Remember, yes, thank you for pointing that. Remember that, y'all. We just talked about how Allen Dulles was fired by JFK. So this is the man who was on the team of investigators to actually try to solve his assassination.
Yeah.
I don't know about y'all, but how many times have you been fired? Like, are you actually wanting to help out the person that just fired you from your job, took your livelihood from you? And
or did Allen Dulles want to be on the commission to cover up any wrongdoing that the CIA could have done looking into the assassination plots against Fidel Castro? Don't forget, before who orchestrated the plot to kill Kennedy, there was an orchestrated plot and proposal to kill Castro, and a CIA and organized crime plot known as Operation Mongoose, which was to smuggle guns into Cuba and somehow poison Fidel Castro. Somehow they turn from Castro and go to Kennedy, right? You got to keep in mind that who were Kennedy's enemies? So you look at the CIA, obviously. Kennedy made it very clear he was going to disintegrate the CIA into a million pieces. He does so after the Bad Pigs. You've got the nuclear war on the brink with Cuba and USSR and Nikita Khrushchev. Was it him? Was it the right-wing typhoons who were losing money by JFK signing the nuclear test ban treaty, which was going to remove billions of dollars a year. And then with removing U.S. personnel out of the what will become the Vietnam War, MLK himself says this country is sending billions and billions of dollars to a war in which we don't know why we're there. And when people in the United States, take Memphis, Tennessee, sanitation workers are making $1.04 an hour and are still qualifying for government assistance, And so there's this strange coincidence or common denominator in which JFK, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, all three of these charismatic leaders who want peace, justice, and equality oppose a war, and they all are killed by gunshot wounds to the face.
I was going to bring it up. I'm so happy you did.
60 years later, we are sitting here now scratching our heads. Who the hell could have done this in this magnitude?
I'm so happy that you brought that up, because that is one of the key things I think that links all three of those men. When we talk about the Vietnam War, one of the last letters, y'all, if you didn't know, Beyond Vietnam, that Dr. King had written, and when he said that, how is it? How is it that we can send all this money over and we can't even feed our people right here at home? And when you look at Dr. King, when he speaks about Vietnam, is that when he kind of starts making a few enemies himself? When he starts speaking out against Vietnam?
King gets enemies on December 5th, 1955, when he talks about, we're going to continue this movement in Montgomery. We're going to rally around this sister named Rosa Parks and the other black women who were arrested or not treated as human beings on city transportation. King, it only gets worse. When we look at King's activism and how he himself evolves as a leader, as a minister, as this messiah, the more popular and successful he gets, the more the forces began to come in on him. And he gives that speech. Day after, they call him the most dangerous man in America. When he wins the Nobel Peace Prize, which we are approaching its 60th anniversary on December the 10th, at the age of 35, in Oslo, Norway, he is called by J. Edgar Hoover the most notorious liar in the United States. And after the voting rights bill, just 4 days after, the Watts riots, occur in L.A., and King begins to see this rise and picking up off of the more militant approach that a Malcolm brought into the lives and the mindset of black Americans, where you can hold your head up high. We don't need help from the federal government. We'll elect our own representatives, to show that you can embrace being black and not need someone white to vouch for you to make you feel important. That's extremely important time.
Yeah.
Next year, that's when Stokely, in the presence of MLK and Greenwood, calls out for black power. That's when you have later that year the Black Panther Party talk about the 10-point program about we're going to police our own communities, and you're looking at the hypocrisy of how America principles were done. You think about the topics of like gun control now. When the Panthers march into the Sacramento in the Capitol building with armed, that's the one time that people decide to make gun control laws. When black men have them. We see in 1918, when the end of the World War I is done, black men are coming back home in their army regalia, and then the summer of 1919, you see a mass lynchings that occur in these communities. And so when you see the fact of black men armed and know the law, that's a threat. So that's when groups like the COINTELPRO counterintelligence program are formed. This is all, of course, after Kennedy's death, but you're beginning to see the shift of evolvement. People just wanted then King to just go to his pulpit and talk about the Lord in his pulpit at Ebenezer with his father. But him speaking out against the war in contemporary matters, this would be like a Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem, or calling for Black Lives Matter. And when people tell athletes, shut up and dribble, this is telling King, shut up and preach. Don't talk about these types of affairs. You know what I'm saying?
Because when you just the legacy that he left, he and Kennedy, when you think about, these are two men who had to have been two of the most disliked men in different groups in different ways of their time. But they were on the cusp of extraordinary change.
Very true.
And I think what, stands out to me, we know that a few years after Kennedy is killed, MLK, Dr. King's assassinated in 1968. But before this happens, you know, his story too, you all. The investigation into Dr. King's assassination is something else. We may get into that. We may have another episode we get to talk about MLK's assassination. But I just have to ask this though, because we've talked a lot about Kennedy and the different groups and organizations and stuff that were involved. And we know that in this country, in the United States, and as well as many other people in the world, they still think that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin.
Yeah.
And a big part of that was, I think you mentioned this earlier, they had to do, certain people who were formerly a part of the CIA, they had to do what was needed and what was what they had to put together at the time for their case to make it where Lee Harvey Oswald was truly the lone assassin. And this one term that kept coming up was the magic bullet theory. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because, you know, a lot of people, when they watch that Zapruder film, they ask the question, well, how is it that he was shot from this place or that place? Especially, you know, when he goes up and he swings his head back, but then they claim that he was shot and then it was from the back. You know, you hear so many different things. Talk to us a little bit about that, because this is a key part, if not one of the most significant parts to, I believe, the investigation into John F. Kennedy's assassination.
Well, it starts out with journalism in the media and how the media covered the assassination. On the night of the assassination, CBS anchor, who's still with us today, he spoke about the late, great Walter Cronkite, but Dan Rather,
yeah.
in Dallas on CBS. And he was amongst the few to see the first Zapruder film in its raw state. And he saw what the rest of us saw, especially in frame 313, and the president's head goes violently back and to the left. He goes on TV just maybe not even an hour later, and he tells an entire world who's completely in a state of shock about what had happened to their president. And he says that the president's head goes forward, not back.
Right.
So that's not the police. That's not the FBI. That's not the Warren Commission. That's a journalist.
Right.
Telling the American people something that is blatantly false. But you know why he could get away with it? Because the Zapruder film was going to be locked away. See, the Warren Commission established that they're not going to see this. What we say, no one's going to read this
thick 100-something pages.
volumes of the Warren Commission. But that changes in 1975 when Dick Gregory, a true hero, and one of my closest friends and mentors, Robert Grodin, show on the Goodnight America show with Geraldo Rivera, the Zapruder film, and people for the first time, if they were awake that night, and they saw that, and they saw the president roll around on Elm Street, and he's shot, and he's clenching his throat, and then you can see he goes to this way and goes back into the left, which Kevin Costner makes. So you know that's what
back.
You remember about Oliver Stone's film. You know?
Back into the left,
right? And so as to Oswald, the Zapruder film is your timeline of the assassination, and so according to the Warren Commission, the assassination had to have happened in 5.6 seconds because they assumed that it's 3 shots fired, and with the Oswald rifle, which when Oswald was arrested in the Texas theater a couple hours after the assassination, a nitrate test was done. It showed that he had not fired a weapon that day. Warren Commission didn't print that. Second, the rifle did not have none of Oswald's fingerprints on it until after Oswald was at Rose Hill Cemetery preparing for burial.
Wait, could you say that again? Because
the
I
rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano, that BB gun of a rifle, there were no fingerprints of Lee Harvey Oswald's on there until after he was dead. All right? Warren Commission doesn't print on that.
Yeah.
All right? And so when you have the timeline of the assassination, it takes with a bolt action rifle a minimum of 2.3 seconds to load, aim, and fire.
Yeah.
That's without precision aiming.
Right.
And keep in mind that Oswald is firing at this car going away from him. not coming towards him. And this is what I say to everyone thinking about if Oswald could have done the assassination. If I'm Oswald, if I'm an assassin in the 6th floor building of the depository, I'm going to shoot the president when he's coming towards me on Houston Street.
Right.
He doesn't have that shot. The president's motorcade is on Houston Street for a good 4 to 6 seconds.
Yeah.
So if you just need one shot, you have Kennedy right here. He doesn't do that. He waits until he turns onto Elm. But now it puts the president in a triangular crossfire, which is a turkey shoot, an elimination, an execution. And so when you look at, here's the second part, which what I would conceive is, I don't know if Oswald fired a shot or any shot.
Yeah.
What I do know is that when Kennedy's body arrives at Parkland Hospital, the Dallas doctors don't see damage to the front of the president's head, which it would have been there if a shot came from the depository. They see this part of the president's head, the occipital parietal area, is gone, blasted out, which is consistent with a shot from the right front. The president's motorcade has a bullet hole wound in the front windshield, which is consistent from another shot from the front. It was completely taken apart and never seen again.
So, I mean, it seems like, because just listening to you describe about the shots and where they had to have come from, especially looking at the coroner's report and all of that, it is pretty clear that there was a cover up here, because it seems as if they were trying too hard to make their own theory work in this case, because it borders down to this. There had to have been people in these organizations involved because of the mere fact that it's like they pretty much steered away from clear evidence that was right there. And a lot of people don't like to look at that part. They like to just look and say, well, you know, there was an investigation. They did their part. And I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin of, JFK. But then for those who do think that there is a conspiracy, they don't know how deep that it actually runs. Because if you have government agencies like the CIA and the FBI, actually working together to keep this evidence hidden from the public for that long, and then when it actually comes out, there's still nothing done about it. See, that's the part I think that makes a lot of people tick, especially me. And then too, a question that, really sits in my mind, and I remember someone else asking me this the other day. The Kennedy family had so much power, in a sense, and of course a lot of money, plenty of wealth. And Bobby Kennedy himself at this time still is Attorney General, right? He's still the Attorney General. Why didn't he do more in running or trying to get an investigation going into his brother's death?
I think he was a brother first and Attorney General second. And I think that Bobby went through a very rough time grieving his brother. And I think that, I can't speak for the late, great Robert Kennedy. What I do think is that he knew that he specifically made his brother have a lot of enemies.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that.
Robert Kennedy went and, really attacked organized crime, the mob, the mafia. Folks like Carlos Marcello, Sam Giancana, Chicago, Johnny Rosselli, Santos Traficante. These aren't.
These are heavy hitters in the mob.
These are mob bosses.
Yeah.
On the same level of the Hoffas, the John Gottis.
Do you think he blamed himself in a sense?
I think that he felt some sort of responsibility. Yeah. I think he knew that what they were doing was correct.
Yeah.
They were going after criminals. These men were criminal underworld. But to the mob, the mob was like, we got you in the office, so lay off of us. And that didn't
exactly.
happen.
And they thought that was going to happen.
Right.
So you have laid it out for us. You talked to us about the ballistics. You've talked to us about the different government agencies. You've talked to us about the magic bullet. You've talked to us just about the legacy in general when it comes to the late President John F. Kennedy. And I think what I want to ask you this, in your opinion, what would be the state of the country? Just, just thinking about it for a second. Like, what do you think the state of the country would have been then, and maybe even the influence today, had President Kennedy not been assassinated? Like, where would we probably be in terms of politics, foreign policies, and even race relations?
Whew. Very hypothetical question. I think that JFK, I don't think that we would have gone into an escalation of a Vietnam War. I don't know if JFK had the means to get a civil rights bill that he proposed through. I think he needed Johnson for that.
Right.
Because Johnson did carry the Democratic Party in the South along with Richard Russell. But I think that this country, most importantly, would have still had its innocence. Yeah. Because the United States lost its innocence the day of November 22nd, 1963. And I think that's incredibly important to acknowledge. Because no matter, again, where you were, who you were, if you voted for me, if you didn't vote for me, each and every single person felt a tremendous loss that day.
Yeah, it's like the country turned on its head, basically.
Right. And so when that happens, and then you begin to see those civil rights demonstrations continue to escalate, the war, the riots in places like Watts, Detroit, Newark, Harlem, the days of rage, the anti-war protests, more political assassinations, government cover-ups like Watergate, other wars that are coming, weapons of, it makes you wonder. All goes back to that moment.
Yeah.
Eisenhower warned us in the military-industrial complex, and he was right. And so I think that I think it'd be an easier question to answer if Bobby had been elected and not been murdered. How would things have been? And I really think that that's the question that really will steer in my mind and many others' minds. That
had Bobby lived,
had he lived and won,
the people's president, y'all. That was the nickname a lot of people gave him, because he truly was the people's president, y'all. It's not just that; it's other leaders, Cesar Chavez, like you name it, other leaders of other different groups of people and minorities and ethnic backgrounds really liked and loved this man. And I get what you're saying with that. Yeah, he was a brother first, attorney general second. And with so much loss, the Kennedy family had suffered a great deal at this point. You name it, with the loss of Joe Jr., with what happened with their sister Rosemary. It's just so many different tragedies that had happened. Yeah, Kathleen. Oh my gosh. The plane crash, y'all. Like this there are a few Kennedys that lost their lives in a plane crash, including his own son, little John, and, to see now with Caroline Kennedy, she is the last standing of that family. Her mom is gone, her dad is gone, and her brother is gone. And so she's still living to this day. That leads me to one of the two final questions that I have. Do you think that we will ever truly have the real story behind what happened and who did it and what for on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, the assassination of John F. Kennedy?
No.
No. You said that too fast.
No, I don't. I think that if we find the true perpetrators of what took place, it'll be on the grounds of national security. And I think that we won't be very shocked of some of the names of involvement, because we know them. But the media will not overturn this thought process of a plot to kill our heads of state. Every political assassination, it's always got to be this lone nut who just wants to be remembered for something like that. And mental illness is important, but even when you look at the very first political assassination, April 14th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln, people forget that John Wilkes Booth plot with other people was to assassinate the entire cabinet.
Yeah.
President, vice president, secretary of state, defense. But they only talk about Booth.
Yeah.
You know? When you look at the assassination of Kennedy, people talk about Oswald, but they don't talk about Ruby silencing Oswald. They don't talk about Hoover's vendetta against the Kennedy brother. It's J. Edgar Hoover who breaks the news to Bobby that your brother's been shot. And he took a great deal of pride saying that. You know, and so CIA, industrial complex, the organized crime folks, conspiracy, the term, is such a taboo word, which is why are we still there at this point? Could Lee Harvey Oswald have had the motorcade route changed? No.
Right.
Could Lee Harvey Oswald have told the Dallas doctors and had completely different pictures of the president's wounds in his head? Could Lee Harvey Oswald have, you know, the investigation was so elementary. It was so poorly done. And the people that were responsible, and this goes in the King case too, the people responsible for investigating these atrocities had the most to gain.
Right. That's it.
Had the most. Look in King's case. James Earl Ray had to have been the only person to kill King because he was a white racist, which we ain't found a racist bone in James Earl Ray's body yet. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And
we now know later, unfortunately, that some of Martin Luther King's own camp had, they were informants here in the city of Memphis. We won't go into their names or anything, but, you know, it's just really, really, really disturbing.
It is.
To see the levels and attempts to continue this bald-faced lie. Yeah. The Warren Commission is a document, a book that should be on the shelf next to the Cat in the Hat and Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry.
Right.
It's a fabrication of reality. You see with your own eye the president's head moving violently back into the left.
Yes.
You cannot have and sustain that many wounds. You ignore all of the witnesses that run towards the right picket fence. I mean, how more blatant does it have to be? And so when you are a citizen, you pay taxes like everybody else,
right,
and you elect people you think have your best interest, and then they are taken out because they think of a political reason, because you're black, or because I just wanted to make a name for myself, doesn't add up. Because you have to look at what those men were doing and what they were promoting. And all five in that regard, Medgar Evers, JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, they all had one common denominator, and that was peace, justice, and equality. And instead, they meet the most violent deaths that they could happen. And with the exception of Martin Luther King, the other four men are killed in front of their own family. So look at the arrogance of those that committed these atrocities and what that led to. And still, people like me and you and others around this society are still scratching our head. Why can we not see what the CIA and the FBI saw in the National Archives? Where's President Kennedy's brain? Why has it disappeared? Why was President Kennedy's body illegally taken from Parkland? If you were killed or if you die in the state of Texas, it is a law, state law, that an autopsy is conducted. They took the president's body away, and it goes to Bethesda, and then the doctors in Bethesda don't see what the doctors in Dallas see. And so when the doctors in Dallas see these so-called autopsy photographs taken by Bethesda, that's not what we saw. So that means what the hell happened on Air Force One between that 3.5-hour flight from Dallas Love Field to Maxwell, to the Air Force Base in Bethesda, Maryland?
I mean, well, see, that's the thing. You know, with everything that you just said, it is clear as day. So much more information has come out as people continue to do their own research as well, as you pointed out. So why has there not been anyone else? I know we talked about Jim Garrison and Clay Shaw and that whole case, but why has there not been someone to say today, hey, look, listen, You know, here is the evidence clear as day. I can walk you all through this. This is what the coroner's report say, but this is what actually happened. You know, all of the things that we have to back up what the truth is, you know, like looking at the facts. Why hasn't someone else stepped up and say, I'm ready to take on the mantle of presenting information to show that there were other people involved, and some, I'm sure, are still living.
They have done it. I don't know about that.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think that there's be anyone that you can properly prosecute and bring them to justice. Like the state of Mississippi.
I don't know. See, we want everybody though, even the youngins that was involved that didn't even know any better.
The state of Mississippi had an opportunity to bring Carolyn Bryant to trial after the reopening of the case in 2004.
Oh, that ticks.
And they didn't do it. Yeah. They didn't do it. So if they didn't do it for that, they're not going to do it for this. And I think that the people involved, they're all dead. Now, if that would overturn the assumption that Kennedy was killed, the default theory is Lee Harvey Oswald did, yeah, that could be changed. But I would say and counter that there are many researchers, mentors, scholars, historians, educators, just people who have regular day jobs in this story. Yeah. It's such an obsession to them, and they've written book after book after book after documentary after podcast, and they're saying the same thing that we're talking about today. But when your government doesn't want to go by that, what's the point?
It's almost as if you know, a lot of people may like this country, in a sense, not only betrayed that family, but they owe them an apology. You know, like they didn't get the I'm sorry, because they definitely deserve one, especially with everything that not only they went through with John F. Kennedy, but with, you know, their brother. And see, that's another conversation for another time, because I still don't think that Sirhan was, you know, like with that whole situation with Bobby Kennedy. But it's sad to see that even now in 2024, you know, there are still some people who would love to not see the truth fully come out.
No, they don't. They don't want to see it. And again, it's the privilege and entitlement and the arrogance of so many who live under this climate of hate that Malcolm talked about. And, you know, when Malcolm got a bad rap, and they said when asked about the assassination of President Kennedy, he's like, President Kennedy was not killed because some lone fanatic. He was killed because America accepts a climate of hate. Yeah. And he said, and when you have that type of climate of hate, the chickens will come home to roost. And so that was not an indictment that Kennedy deserved his fate. He was saying that the United States lived in a climate of hate that not only took the president out, it took him out less than 2 years later too. Yeah. By his own people.
Exactly.
His own people.
Now his own people. But you know, people ask the question too, was it truly just his own people, or were there government agencies behind? Yeah. So, you know, it's sad to say.
What I'm saying is a black man shot Malcolm X.
Yes. No, most definitely. Yeah. A black man shot Malcolm X, and the FBI was right-handed behind, orchestrating it and right behind it.
And covered it up. And even though with recent documentaries and things that have come out, you know, that is, I guess in a sense, trying to correct the narrative behind that. They exonerated 2 of the men.
Well, do you think still that everyone that was involved, and the reason that I say that is a lot of people don't just want the shooters. You see what I mean? Like, a lot of people don't just want the person that pulled the trigger. They want everyone that was in the room when it came to, you know, like the plot to kill King, the plot to kill Kennedy, the plot to kill Malcolm X, the plot to kill. They want everyone. Yeah. So I guess that's just a dream. That's a day that we may never see, where every person, every entity involved would actually be brought to justice. I wish I was optimistic, but I'm not. Well, I do want to ask you this, because you have given us such a depth of knowledge here, and you have been on this road. How long would you say? Oh, November 1993. So I was 8 years old when I started this. All of this, like, it's diving deep into the histories, uncovering information about all these great historical figures, their lives, their personal lives, the things, the changes that they have made, the work that they have done, and the legacies they left behind. What is it that we can do, and every person out there, what is one thing you think that they should do if they want to continue to uncover the truth and correct the narrative? What is it that they should do?
Be unbiased. Read the class and read the trash. Read a book. Use primary sources. Read the files. Subpoena the files. And read them again. And to allow yourself to be vulnerable in having what your preconceived notions were. Don't leave any stone unturned. Again, when this country has responded, this country responds to hate, violence. You know, the Second Amendment of right to bear arms it seems to be more important than the right to free speech. It seems to be more important than the right to vote, the right to citizenship, the right for gender equality, racial equality. This climate was, 4 years ago, the president wins the election, there was an insurrection on the state capitol.
Right.
Think about it. In 2020, you think something like that happens in Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Because it did.
Exactly.
Wilmington, 1898,
And get away with it, y'all.
Get away with it. So while it's laughable, it's also like very damning to think that in this generation that is supposed to be so far removed from there's this theory of make America great again. Mm-hmm. The hell was America great? And I asked the question, who the hell was it great for? And
Ooh,
when you explain, and then when you tell me what made America so great, I'll give you a rebuttal that you're not gonna want to hear.
No, I like that question. You said, no, who was, because everyone always, I do hear that question a lot. When was America great? But I love the question that you posed. Who was it great for?
Who was it great for?
When it was supposedly so great. Who was it great for?
Yep.
It's almost like the question, like when we ask that, when we talk about the Civil War being fought for states' rights. States' rights to do what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so with that, when you said what can people do, it's also do your research.
Yeah.
Do your due diligence, and don't let those purveyor of violence, hate, fear, and disinformation control your narrative. Because for so long, a case that's very near and dear to both of us, Emmett Till was not afraid.
Yeah.
And these men said, what else could we do? Well, that didn't happen because you were a journalist, William Fradford Huey, took that lie, and it continued for a half of a century until real people like the Keith Beauchamps of the world come in and say, that's not what happened. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And so
that was a heartbreaking moment in realizing that the fact that woman, I'll just say that woman, just her name alone sends a chill up my spine, because the fact that she was never brought up on any perjury charges or anything, even after, and that's something that people can't get, the omission. The fact that she admitted that she lied.
Well, they had a warrant out for her arrest and they didn't even serve her.
And even with, this whole thing about the grand jury.
Let me have a warrant out for my arrest, not for like kidnapping or murder. Let me have a warrant out for arrest if I had a child for child support.
Yeah.
Or if I failed to show up for court for a ticket.
Yeah.
They're going to come arrest my ass.
Yeah.
But kidnapping and murder of a boy?
Of a young 14-year-old
So that's just tell you again. When was America great?
And who for?
Because Mamie Till, Wheeler Parker, all these other important people who were connected to him didn't receive justice.
Mr. Simeon Wright.
Simeon Wright, rest his soul. All these people didn't receive justice. The family of the Kennedy and the American people still have not received justice, because I will never be satisfied with this fictitious theory that a 24-year-old, at best, medium marksman can fire in precision of 3 shots in 5.6 seconds at a moving target and create the wounds that they said it created. This single bullet, the magic bullet that you were speaking about, going through the president's back, out his chest, into Gunberger Connolly, twisting and zigzagging and around, causing up to 10 wounds, and then the bullet come out in pristine condition.
Just sounds crazy.
What did the... So anyway.
It just sounds insane.
Yeah. So to sell that lemon to the American public, I think is one of the greatest disservices in the history of our nation.
People lost the trust in their chief of staff, the government. But even when we talk about Kennedy, when you just look at footage, y'all go and look at footage, go on YouTube, look at all the different footage from that time, the early 60s and stuff. It like you said, there was a sense of innocence and a sense of pride, but people seemed more, people always say that Americans seem so patriotic. You can really say that at that time. There was a patriotism that was there, and you felt it from all sides. I mean, you had even black men, yes, we've all heard about the draft and everything, the drafting of black men and having to go to war, but there were some men who willingly went and wanted to fight for their country.
But they couldn't come back home and register to vote.
Yeah. And now, so let me say this about that. These men, when we talk about them, JFK, MLK, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers. Mind y'all, Medgar Evers, was a military veteran too. Do you think that each of them, especially in regards to MLK and Medgar Evers and Malcolm X, that they had an epiphany? Because I know when we talk about MLK, that speech, that he gave the night before he was assassinated, even when you look at with Bobby Kennedy, what they said, some of his last words were when they said that he even asked, was everyone else okay? Do you think that they had an epiphany before that day came, that fatal day for each of them? Like understanding almost in a sense that things would never be the same.
I think the black man did.
Yeah.
I think Medgar Evers knew he was a marked man. He was on the Klan's White Citizens Council hit list as early as 1955. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested over 30 times. No telling how many death threats. They were sending him letters to his wife urging him to commit suicide. Malcolm X knew that his home was firebombed the week before he was killed with his babies inside. So yeah, I think they knew. They knew.
Yeah.
Your days are numbered. The Kennedy brothers, I think that they had the protection that King, Malcolm, and Medgar didn't have.
Right.
They had the protection that they didn't have. And that was just, not to say that they're better or valued more. It was the times.
The times. I just keep thinking about just how different the country would probably be today, the progress, instead of regressing, because it seems like, and especially in the last 8 years, we've done so much regressing as a people. And I feel like it's so sad to see so much of the work undone by our ancestors. The fact that we exist and can sit in certain spaces, to be in certain rooms, is because we didn't have to fight the same fight that they did. Mm-hmm. And this is our ancestors who were willingly fighting during the era and time of John F. Kennedy's presidency, before his presidency, and even after his presidency. Yeah. And the truth, y'all, hopefully just one day, I'm gonna remain just a little bit optimistic for you, Ryan. I'm just gonna remain a little bit optimistic. Hopefully one day the full truth will come out. Just maybe America will give the Kennedys an apology. Just maybe everything will come to the forefront about what actually happened on that fateful day, November 22nd, 1960.
The president was a hero. He was him and Martin Luther King. As a child, they were my heroes, along with Michael Jackson. But I wanted to be just like all of them. I wanted to look like them, talk like them, study like them, study how they talk, their mannerisms. Mm-hmm. And to have that kind of influence on a 7-8-year-old impressionable black kid, when I wake up and go do my job every day, there's not a moment that their legacies, their sacrifice, their courage, their strength doesn't resonate with me some way internally. So it's fit in your DNA. And so the time is always right to do the right thing. Never a time the wrong thing. And there's no statute of limitation to murder. But the truth will always set you free. And I firmly believe.
I do too. And the prayer is that this country can one day finally tell the truth. You still not optimistic about that, are you?
Hell no.
Well, I hope that each of you have taken something from this, because, this is just the beginning. We have to uncover the truth and dive deep into each of these great leaders of the time, because not only are their legacies living through us, and we are living proof of that, but especially going out to the legacy of that of Malcolm X, who is perhaps one of my favorite civil rights leaders, Medgar Evers, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Gen Zers say it all the time, and I'm going to snag on their one of their favorite quotes that they say all the time now: we are living our ancestors' dreams. And so I hope that this will be the beginning of uncovering the truth, not just of JFK, but so many other great other leaders who were cut down before they truly, in a sense, had a chance to live. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being here.
Thank you, Kyra. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Y'all be safe and go do your research now.